Today I am chatting to Yash, who got a band 8.5 in IELTS. Now, this is the fourth time that Yash has taken the IELTS test, and in this interview we discuss the tips and strategies that helped him improve his reading from a band 8 to a 9, his listening from band 7.5 to 9, his speaking from 7 to 7.5, and his writing from band 6 to band 7.5. Now, one thing that I have noticed from talking to people like Yash that do very well in the IELTS test is that they are very methodical about their approach to their preparation. For example, in this interview, Yash tells me how he kept all of his mistakes in a 40-page Word document that he revised regularly, and how he knew all the answers from the Cambridge books from memory because he had done the practice tests so many times. Now, there are a lot of great tips and strategies that you will learn from Yash, and I hope that today's interview can help you with your own IELTS preparation. Let's begin. So thank you very much, Yash, for agreeing to come on and be interviewed about your preparation for IELTS. Now, you actually did the IELTS test in 2019 for the first time, is that right?
Yeah, that's true.
And so what was your score in 2019 when you first did the IELTS test, if you can remember?
If I remember that correctly, I got 7.5 in listening, 8 in reading, 6.5 in writing, and 7 in speaking.
Okay, and what was your latest score in your IELTS test?
My latest score is band 9 in listening and reading, and band 7.5 in writing and speaking.
Right. And have you noticed a big improvement in your English level between doing the test in 2019 and doing the test recently?
Yes, there has been a significant improvement, and my score has boosted. So there has been a significant amount of change in the way I used to learn English as well.
Right. Okay. So tell us about the change in the way that you've learned English between 2019 and now.
Well, first of all, I was just, when I started with IELTS, I didn't actually look at the text format. I just studied for like a couple of days, watched some YouTube videos, and I just applied for the exam, and that's why I didn't got a good score. For writing, especially, I didn't even practice writing one single essay or uh, task one before writing the actual exam. So that is the reason I believe I got very low score in writing, and even in listening,
For
yeah.
example, the lowest score that you got in writing, I think, was band 6. Is that right?
That's true. So there is an interesting story which we can talk about it. So I got very poor score, which I think is 6.5 in the first time. So and in listening also, I wanted 8, but I scored 7.5. So I think that I didn't had enough practice in listening, and that is the reason I got that low score.
And so tell me, let's go straight into the writing then, because that's usually the area of IELTS that most candidates and students really struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, what do you attribute your amazing improvement from band 6 to band 7.5 to?
Well, there are a lot of things. First thing is that I practiced a lot. I used to write task one and task two every single day. And it's not just about writing them and just, writing. And I think that feedback is also important. So after I used to write the essays, I used to analyze those essays by checking the grammatical mistakes, by checking if I had achieved the task achievement and task response, by also analyzing if there are any blatant errors that I can work on. So there were so many common mistakes. For example, I was not very good at articles. I used to make a lot of mistakes in articles in grammar. So I improved on that. And regarding the vocabulary, I used to learn a word list. So there was a long word list that was given to me by one of my friends, and I used to read that, just read that and memorize that. But
If I may,
when it
so when you say you had a long word list, was that the academic word list?
that's true, yeah,
Okay, what I'll do is I'll put a link to that word list in the description of this video, just to help
yeah,
other people out preparing for their IELTS test, so they know which list you're referring to.
that's
Um,
true, yeah, that would
all right.
be helpful.
Yeah, please continue.
So I used to read those words and I used to memorize those words, and I used to try to apply those while I was writing my essays. But somehow that didn't went good because I was trying to memorize those and trying to forcefully apply those words into my essays, which which would ended up into a pretty bad essay. So that's the reason I stopped applying those words which I used to memorize. Instead, I used to learn collocations. So I just don't use memorize some word and apply it. I try to see the overall picture and then apply it into a sentence so that it sounds normal.
Mm. And so how did you go about learning collocations? Because, for example, when you had the word list, you said, okay, well, these
Yeah.
are the words that I'm going to learn. So how did you
hmm
choose the collocations that you needed to learn for IELTS?
So there were a lot of collocations that I found on the internet. However, there's one specific book, which is IELTS Consultant's Vocab Secrets, and that had a lot of lot of good vocabulary and topic-specific vocabulary. I mean, so that helped me a lot. I used to just, and those are not the words which I have to memorize because those are just the common words. It's the way we use those words in a sentence. And when we use collocations, it makes the sentence more beautiful.
Mm. And so how would you, for example, how would you know if the collocations that you were using and the sentences that you were writing the collocations in were correct if you couldn't show them to a teacher?
Yeah, so the major part is that I never evaluated my essay with any of the professional teachers. I used to do it by myself, and I used to read Band 9 essays, and I used to compare those essays with the essays that I have written. So, and then I used to see that, okay, the structure is different. How can I improve on my structure? How can I use the good vocabulary, and how can I make my essay sound more natural? Because when I used to read most of the essays, I used to memorize the words such as on the other hand, on the one hand, alternatively. So those are the signposts that I used to memorize. But yeah, after a later stage, I realized that that's not correct, and we should be more natural, as natural as possible, so that the examiner, when he's reading our essay, he can have a logical flow in his mind to understand what the point we are trying to make.
Yeah, that's a very good point because a lot of the time when students are preparing for the IELTS test, they learn the words and then they make their essay around the words. Whereas what you're saying is the right way to go is the opposite. It's you have your idea and your idea that you want to communicate, and then you use the correct words, the correct linking words, the correct signposting words in order to get your message across.
That's totally true.
Mm. And you also said that at the beginning you noticed that you struggled with articles, and that's very
Yeah.
common. A lot of students or a lot of people preparing for IELTS really struggle with articles because there are so many rules about how to use articles in English. and they're very difficult to get the hang of, especially if you don't have articles necessarily in your language or articles to use in a different way. So, how did you go about consciously improving your use of articles?
So I first went with the conventional method, reading about articles and reading the rules and the exceptions as well, because there are a lot of exceptions in articles. Um, so I read that, but yeah, somehow that didn't go. That didn't go well. So I had to, when I used to read any sentence, I used to think about the articles, how the articles are used, and then it came naturally. I just practiced a lot, and I used to make sure that. And when I used to type one sentence, after completing one sentence, I used to read that to make sure that I haven't made any article or verb agreement mistake. So
Right.
that's one another tip, that whenever you are writing your essay, after you complete one sentence, just try to read it in a couple of seconds that you haven't made any mistakes.
Right. So, did you do that on a per sentence level? You would write your sentence, then look at your sentence, and then move on to the next sentence? Or would you
That's
finish
true.
your answers and then just look sentence by sentence?
For me, it was quite difficult to review my essay at the end, because there was one problem with me. Whenever I used to write essays, I used to think a lot, finding the good idea, and that eats up a lot of time when you are finding very good idea and you are thinking about the relevancy of the topic. And that's the reason I didn't time. That's the reason I couldn't had much time to review. But yeah, slowly I progressed and I made sure that I complete my essay at least 5 minutes before. So I used to complete task two in 35 to 37 minutes. So I have at least 5 or 3 minutes at the end to read it once again.
And you did the academic IELTS, is that right, or the general IELTS?
I did all the hours, which those are general training hours, all the four attempts.
Oh, they're all general training. So you had to do a letter and then write an essay as well.
Yeah, but there was a different approach that I followed. I used to write essays first and then letters,
Right. And why is that?
because I thought that I after so in India there is listening section first, then there is reading section, then there is writing section. So I was already exhausted by listening by the time I complete listening and reading. So in writing, I used to do it the other way. I used to complete the task two first and then task one, because task two holds more value than task one. It's 60%, 66%. So marks is task one and two-thirds of marks is task two. So I gave more importance to task two.
And you also said one other thing that I found very interesting is you said you looked at band nine model answers and then you
Yeah.
compared your answers to those band nine model answers. So would you
Yeah.
literally find model answers, for example, in textbooks or online, and then write the same essay question?
And not the same way, actually. I just used to, and not on the internet, because I know there are a lot of different sources available of band 9, but they are not, right?
Right.
And they also have a lot of mistakes. So I just followed the books provided by consultants and that I found online while I was finding different sources of reading a good essay. And then I found this book and I found it very interesting, because the way they have explained different types of essays is good. And the structure that I followed was not from that book. I created my own structure. For example, for discussion essays, I had a predefined structure in my mind, because, as I said, I had I was facing difficulties while I was writing, because I was not able to create sentences, which is one of the major pain points all the IELTS test takers face in writing section.
So what books or which resources would you recommend, especially for the writing?
For IELTS writing, I would suggest go through the IELTS Consultant Band 9 Vocab Secrets, Band 9 Grammar Secrets, and Band 9 Task 2 book. So those three books were really helpful for me to achieve from 6.5 to 7 and then 7 from 7.5 because uh, after reading the vocab secrets book, I thought that I embellished my writing with a bit more, and that's how I achieved 7.5 from 7.
Yeah, it's often the case when people learn more vocabulary connected to especially the common topics in IELTS, they find it easier to think of ideas and write those ideas quickly. Is that what you found?
Yes, I found the same because, as I said, after reading academic word lists, it's quite difficult to use those vocabulary in our words. However, when we use a collocation, for example, let's talk about state of the art technology, or let's talk about um, some other collocation, which is very useful when we try to create a sentence. And by that state of the art technology, if we think about that, then we can write a bit more, a sentence or two sentences about technology. So that's how it also helps us in idea creation.
Mm. And your speaking level also improved quite dramatically between all of the IELTS tests that you did. In fact, I saw that it was kind of one level and then it went down a little bit and then it went back up, but always within 6.5, 6. And then eventually it also went to 7.5. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. So my speaking on the last three attempts was 7, and this time it got 7.5.
Interesting. And so, what was it that you did to improve your speaking?
So I used to watch YouTube videos from Keith, and I never used any phrasal verb or idioms in my last three attempts. So that could be one reason I was stuck at band 7. And then after watching Keith's videos on phrasal verbs and on using idioms, I sprinkled one or two idioms in my test, in my exam. And yeah, I think that's the one major point I might have got 7.5.
Can you remember which idioms or phrasal verbs you used that you were quite happy about?
Uh, but there were a lot of them. I mean, I remember them. I first memorized them, and then I tried to use those idioms naturally. So there was one video from Keith regarding uh, how to use idioms while you are expressing something. For example, when you are happy, you can say that I was on cloud nine. And if you are frustrated, then you can say it got on my nerves. So those all those things, if you are bored, then you can say that, yeah, I'm quite bored. So that's very common thing to say, right? But instead, if you use idiomatic expression to uh, to express your ideas or to express your feelings, then you might reach from 7 to 7.5.
Right, and so that's what you did. So you were taking kind of thinking about what you would say normally and then looking for an idiom that you could use in place of, for example, expressing an emotion.
Yes, I used to replace my common words by using idioms.
Right, okay, interesting. And so you recommended Keith from English Speaking Success for learning good vocabulary for speaking. Um,
That's true.
yeah. And then what about listening and reading? Because that was also quite a dramatic increase from getting around band 7 to band 9.
Yeah, for reading, I was quite okay because it was 8, 8.5, 8, 8.5, and 9. But listening, I was struggling because in my third attempt as well, I got 7.5 in listening and I needed 8. So in first and third attempt, I got 7.5 in listening. And that's where I thought that I need more practice. And I've already completed Cambridge books, Cambridge 10 to 15, several times. So when I used to write the exam, I used to remember the answers as well. That was the part.
Right. Because you've done
So
them so many times.
yeah,
So
so
you didn't even need to listen. You could say you saw the question, you remembered the answer automatically.
true. Yes. So that's the reason I was finding different sources on the internet, and I came across check correct IELTS with Rob, and that's a good website. That's a good YouTube channel to practice listening,
Right.
and it has exam like real exam like difficulty level, and the format is also similar.
That's so is that what you did after you finished all the Cambridge books? You looked for other resources and you found, was it IELTS with Rob?
Crack IELTS with Rob. That's a YouTube channel.
Okay, great. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And you also speak English quite regularly in your work, is that correct?
Yes, I'm a software engineer, and I used to. Uh, I'm having this meet daily stand-up meetings, and I used to speak in English every day. So speaking, I thought was not a problem, but the requirements for IELTS is to have a range of uh, different types of sentences, and if you can produce variety in your speaking, then you can achieve higher bands.
So if,
Generally, when we are speaking, like when we are having a day-to-day conversation, we are mostly using present tense or sometimes past tense sentence past tenses. However, when we are speaking for an IELTS exam, we have to make sure that we are using present, past, and future as well.
and so did you have a speaking partner or a teacher that you could practice IELTS speaking with?
Luckily, I had my colleague, and he was also preparing for this exam. And for the last 10 or 15 days, I think we had this one-on-one session every single day, so that I'm used to the speaking test.
No, that's a good idea. And would you recommend getting a speaking partner for preparing for IELTS?
Yes, definitely. Because if you speak by yourself and record and then try to analyze it, first thing, it eats up a lot of time. And second thing, that some things you think or you consider correct are not actually. And that can be rectified by your partner.
Right. So was your partner a similar level in terms of English, or were they a higher level than you in order to correct you?
Uh, he was kind of similar level to me. And yeah, we both got band 7 uh, in the first time. And yeah, so I can say that we both had the same kind of English level in terms of speaking.
And that's great. So you noticed some of his mistakes and he noticed some of your mistakes.
Yes, and the most important part of it is that we used to write what mistakes have we done. And when my colleague used to explain me the mistakes that I have done, I literally used to note them, and I tried not to repeat them again. That's how we can improve.
Right. That's a very clever idea because what you're doing there is you're making it very conscious that this is a mistake that I make regularly. And by drawing it to your attention, you're less likely to make that mistake in the future.
That's true. And that's not just with speaking. I did similar with writing, with reading, and with listening as well. For example, in listening, I sometimes didn't used to hear the plurals correctly. So I used to focus more on listening when they are speaking when I'm listening some plural. I used to make sure that okay, I'm writing it correctly. And in reading as well, for example, if there are two or more words, then sometimes while typing, I can make a typo error, or I can even make a spelling error. So that's the case with listening and reading both. So we have to make sure that we don't make such silly mistakes, so that
And so, y- you studied for IELTS over a long period of time. When you were also working, I presume, full time as a software engineer. So, what did a typical studying day look like for you? How did you organize your time?
For me, it was quite difficult to practice daily. So in first and second attempt, I used to practice like twice a week, sometimes thrice a week, and that's only for an hour because I had a lot of responsibilities as well. So I didn't had much time for IELTS at that point in time. But then I realized that if I want to improve my score, I need to be working diligently on IELTS, and I need to try to improve my English as well. And that's the reason in my third and fourth attempt, I used to practice giving exams daily for 2 hours, and then 1 hour I used to dedicate especially for the errors that I used to make. For example, if I'm writing and I'm making an article error, I used to note that down in a Word file, and then I used to read the Word file every single day so that I don't repeat the same mistake again.
Right. And so, for example, how many pages was that Word file by the end of your preparation?
I started doing that in my third attempt. I mean, before I was preparing for the third attempt, I started doing that. I can say the file was pretty big. As I said, I used to make a lot of mistakes in articles and some grammatical errors. So yeah, it can be, I think, 30 or 40 pages. Yeah, at
Right,
the end.
30, 40 pages of all the mistakes, and then would you correct the mistakes as well next time?
Yes. Yeah. So I write one sentence first and then I highlight what is the error. And same sentence I write again by resolving the error. So I know how to resolve the error as well, not just highlighting the error.
Great. Now, just before we end this interview, are there any resources or particular tips or strategies that you would like to share with other IELTS candidates?
Yeah, a couple of things. As I said, I practiced a lot. So practice is the key here, guys. If you want to achieve good score, you should practice a lot. And not just one section. I mean, you have to make sure that you practice all the sections, listening, reading, speaking, writing. So that can improve your overall score. And the second thing is that whenever you try to make mistake, don't just read it out that okay, this is the mistake that I have done, and I'll try to not repeat this mistake once again. But sometimes, you forget about it because there are a lot of mistakes that you read on a day-to-day basis. So it's very important to note down your mistakes and read them again to make sure that you don't repeat those again, right? So that's second thing. Third thing that I would like to talk about is related to listening and reading. So in listening, uh, we should try to avoid the singular plural errors and the capitalization error as well. For example, if you are hearing name of a city or a country or even a place, then you should make sure that you are writing the first letter in capital. So those are pretty common mistakes, and we can resolve them very easily, but somehow we don't try to work on them. And that's how we end up in losing marks. So that's related to listening. And regarding reading, as I gave all the exams, which were computer based tests, so I used to copy the word and I used to paste it in the answer section for reading so that I don't make spelling mistakes. That's one tip that I can give that can help you with getting good scores.
Great, absolutely brilliant tips. So thank you very much, Yash. It was a total pleasure to speak to you. And am I right in thinking you've got the IELTS score you need, and that's going to be helping you to achieve permanent residency in Canada?
Yeah, that's true.
Right. Okay. So best of luck with your new life in Canada.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.